The first message came from a woman I barely remembered meeting. "Hey Arthur, it's Sophia. Alice gave me your number before you left for Denver. She said you'd probably want someone to grab dinner with so you're not eating hotel room service alone all week. That true, or is she exaggerating how sad your business trips are?" I read that text twice, sitting alone in a hotel room in Denver, and felt a strange, uneasy warmth spread through my chest. The kind of warmth you feel right before you realize something is wrong. Alice, my wife of 4 years. The woman who had, as far as I knew, never once suggested I have dinner with anyone but her when I traveled. Alice, who called every night at 9 o'clock sharp when I was away, who used to say she couldn't stand the idea of me sitting in some empty hotel room by myself. That Alice was now giving my number to her friends and encouraging them to keep me company. I didn't know it yet, but that text message was the opening move in a plan Alice had been building for weeks. A plan involving 6 of her closest friends, a private wager worth $1 million, and a scheme so calculated it would take me months to fully understand it. By the time I flew home from that trip, I would have had dinner with 3 different women, each one warm, each one interested, each one somehow just checking in on Alice's behalf. Within 2 months, all 6 of her friends would have found their way into my life, smart women, beautiful women, each with her own reason to be near me, each one auditioning for something I didn't yet know I was being tested for. What Alice never told me, what I only pieced together much later, was that she wasn't testing my loyalty. She was trying to destroy it. She needed me to slip, needed proof of infidelity, needed a reason to walk away from our marriage clean with the settlement she wanted, so she could finally run off with the man she'd loved the entire time we'd been married. My own executive assistant, George. She thought 6 beautiful women could break me in 6 weeks. She never imagined that those same 6 women would end up seeing me more clearly than she ever had, and that when she finally came crawling back, broke and humiliated, it wouldn't be guilt or loyalty that kept the door closed to her. It would be them. This is the story of how my wife tried to buy her freedom with a $1 million bet on my faithfulness, and how that bet turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. Chapter 1. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I was 31 years old when I found out my marriage had been a performance from the very beginning. And if you'd asked me a year earlier to describe myself, I would have said, a man who believes if you love someone properly, they'll never have a reason to look elsewhere. I grew up outside Cleveland, Ohio, the middle child of a contractor and a schoolteacher, raised in a house where showing up mattered more than saying the right words. My father used to tell me that love wasn't a feeling, it was a series of choices you made every single day, whether you felt like it or not. I carried that lesson into adulthood, into my career building a mid-sized architecture firm from nothing into something that mattered, and into my marriage. I met Alice Bennett at a charity gala in Chicago 6 years ago. She was 26, sharp-witted, gorgeous in a way that made rooms go quiet when she walked in, and she had this habit of laughing at her own jokes half a second before anyone else caught up. I was drawn to her immediately, not just the beauty, but the confidence, the way she seemed to know exactly what she wanted out of life. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. We married in a small ceremony overlooking Lake Michigan, and for the first stretch of our marriage, I believed with my whole chest that I had built the life my father always told me to aim for. For 4 years, I gave Alice everything I had. When her mother got sick, I flew with her to Phoenix at a moment's notice, sat in waiting rooms for hours, held her hand through the worst nights of her life. When she wanted to quit her corporate job and start her own interior design business, I funded it without hesitation and never once made her feel like she owed me for it. I bought her the house she wanted in Lincoln Park, the car she'd always dreamed of, jewelry for no reason other than that I loved seeing her happy. I made sure she never had to ask twice for anything. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, because Alice was remarkably good at hiding it, was that somewhere in the middle of all that giving, Alice's heart had already left the building. His name was George Patterson. I hired him myself 3 years into my marriage, as my executive assistant, sharp, charming, good at his job. The kind of man who remembered everyone's coffee order and could smooth over a tense client meeting with a well-timed joke. George came to almost every dinner party Alice and I hosted. He was at our house more than most of our actual friends. And somewhere in all those overlapping evenings, somewhere between the wine and the easy conversation, Alice fell in love with him. I remember one dinner party in particular, maybe 18 months before everything unraveled, where George stayed late to help me clear the table while Alice loaded the dishwasher. I walked back into the kitchen for another round of glasses and caught the two of them mid-laugh over something I hadn't heard. Alice's hand resting briefly on his forearm before she pulled it back and turned to greet me like nothing had happened. At the time, I read it as nothing. Alice was affectionate with everyone, George was easy to laugh with, and I had no frame of reference for suspicion. I even remember telling Michael once, half joking, that George was probably the only man alive who could make my wife laugh harder than I could. I meant it as a compliment to both of them. I had no idea I was describing the exact thing that was quietly dismantling my marriage. I never suspected it, not once. I trusted my wife completely, and I trusted George as an employee who respected the line between professional and personal. Looking back now, I understand that trust was exactly what allowed the two of them to hide it so completely. Nobody suspects betrayal from the people they've given no reason to doubt. For a long time, Alice was content, or perhaps patient is the better word, to stay married to me while quietly loving another man. I think she liked the security, the house, the lifestyle, the version of respectability that came with being Mrs. Whitfield. But eventually, patience runs out, and love that's been suppressed for years has a way of demanding to be acted on. She just needed a way out that didn't cost her anything. That's where the plan began. Chapter 2. I found out about the full scope of Alice's plan almost by accident, nearly 3 months after that first text from Sophia, and I want to walk you through exactly how it unfolded, because the pieces only made sense once I had all of them. It started with a prenuptial agreement Alice and I had signed before our wedding, a standard document, my lawyer's suggestion, nothing either of us thought much about at the time. Buried in that agreement was a clause stating that if either party was found to have committed infidelity, the other party would be entitled to a significantly larger settlement in the event of divorce. At the time, we'd both laughed about it, certain neither of us would ever need to worry about that clause. Alice needed me to be the one who broke that clause, not her. If she left me for George on her own, she'd walk away with almost nothing beyond what she'd contributed to our marriage. No house, no settlement, nothing close to the lifestyle she'd built over 4 years. But if she could prove I had been unfaithful, even once, even briefly, the entire structure of the divorce would flip in her favor. She'd walk away with the house, a significant settlement, and her freedom to be with George without any financial consequence. So she made a bet with her 6 closest friends, Sophia, Grace, Olivia, Natalie, Hannah, and Chloe. Women I had known for years as Alice's inner circle, women who had stood at our wedding, who had eaten dinner at our table more times than I could count. Alice told them she'd pay out $1 million, split however they wanted to divide it, to whichever of them successfully got me to cross the line while I was away on business, or shortly after I returned. She framed it, according to what I learned later, as a game, a wild, audacious dare between friends, the kind of thing rich, bored women in her circle sometimes did for entertainment and cash. She never told them the real reason behind it. She never told them about George, about the prenup, about the divorce she was already planning. She just told them there was $1 million on the table, and that all they had to do was make her husband fall for one of them. 6 women, 6 approaches, 1 prize, and a husband who had no idea he was the subject of a wager being placed on his own marriage. Chapter 3. Sophia had been the first, warm and easy from the very beginning, showing up in Denver with an openness that felt less like a stranger and more like someone I'd known for years. We had dinner twice during that trip. Nothing happened, nothing close to it, but I remember thinking even then that there was something remarkably comfortable about her presence. She asked good questions. She listened like she meant it. When I got home, the others started arriving in their own ways, each one different, each one clever. Grace showed up at my office 3 weeks later, claiming she needed advice on a property investment, advice that somehow required 2 long lunches and a walk through the Chicago Riverwalk that lasted far longer than any conversation about real estate should have. Olivia, a yoga instructor with an easy laugh and an even easier way of making people feel like the only person in the room, invited me to a charity fundraiser where she made sure to stand beside me for photographs, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Natalie, quieter, more calculating, worked in finance and began, accidentally, scheduling business meetings at the same coffee shop I frequented every Tuesday morning, always sitting close enough to strike up a conversation that somehow drifted away from business within minutes. Hannah, an artist with paint permanently under her fingernails, invited me to a gallery opening featuring her work, standing close as she explained each piece, her voice dropping to something more intimate whenever she thought no one else was listening. And finally Chloe, the youngest of the group, bold and unfiltered, who simply showed up at a friend's barbecue wearing a red dress clearly chosen with intention, and spent the entire evening making sure I laughed more than I had in months. I want to be honest, I noticed the pattern before I understood the reason behind it. 6 women, all connected to my wife, all suddenly and simultaneously interested in my company. I chalked it up at first to loneliness on my part and coincidence on theirs. Alice and I had been drifting in ways I couldn't quite name, less conversation, more silence at dinner, fewer of those 9 o'clock phone calls when I traveled. I told myself these women were simply filling a gap I hadn't wanted to admit was there. It was Grace who finally told me the truth, 4 weeks after her first visit to my office, sitting across from me at a restaurant downtown, her wine glass untouched in front of her. Arthur, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Okay. Alice put a bet together, between me, Sophia, Olivia, Natalie, Hannah, and Chloe. $1 million split between whoever managed to get you to cheat on her. I don't know all her reasons, she never told us, but I know it wasn't a game to her the way she made it sound to us. I sat there in that restaurant, the noise around me fading into a dull hum, trying to process the fact that my wife had put a price on my faithfulness and handed it to her closest friends like a party favor. $1 million, I repeated slowly. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane, Grace. It is insane, she admitted. I almost didn't come tonight, honestly. I told myself I'd just play along, take my share if it happened, don't overthink it. But somewhere along the way, Arthur, I stopped being able to see this as a game. I actually started caring what happened to you. Genuinely. Chapter 4. Once I understood what was happening, I expected the whole thing to collapse into chaos, accusations, jealousy, 6 women scrambling to win $1 million at my expense. Instead, something far stranger happened. One by one, over the following weeks, each of them came to me privately, the way Grace had, and told me some version of the same confession. Sophia admitted it first, sitting in my office late one evening after everyone else had gone home. I took Alice's offer because $1 million is a lot of money, and I told myself it wouldn't cost me anything to try, she said, arms crossed, eyes not quite meeting mine. But somewhere between Denver and now, this stopped being about the money for me. I don't know when it happened, I just know it did. Olivia told me during a walk after one of her yoga classes. Natalie told me over coffee, in typically efficient, unembellished sentences. Hannah told me standing in front of one of her own paintings, as if the honesty required the shield of her art around her. Chloe predictably was the most direct of all of them, texting me at midnight. Okay, I'll just say it. I stopped caring about Alice's money like 3 weeks ago. I like you, Arthur, for real. Do with that what you want. I called my closest friend Michael that night, needing someone outside the situation to help me make sense of it. Let me get this straight, Michael said, laughing so hard I could hear him struggling to breathe. Your wife put a bounty on your faithfulness, paid her 6 best friends to seduce you, and instead of any of them succeeding at the actual mission, all 6 of them genuinely fell for you separately. When you put it that way, Arthur, that's not a marriage problem anymore. That's a whole movie. He laughed again, then grew quieter. But really, man, how are you feeling? Not the version you think you're supposed to feel, the actual truth. I sat with that question for a long time before answering. Confused, I admitted. But also for the first time in longer than I want to admit, seen, genuinely seen, not managed, not tolerated, seen. Michael was quiet for a moment. That's on Alice, you know. Whatever she was doing while pretending everything was fine at home, it clearly left you starving for something simple. Of course, 6 women showing real interest is going to land different when you've been quietly ignored in your own marriage for who knows how long. He wasn't wrong. And realizing that my confusion wasn't really about 6 women at all, but about how long I'd been unknowingly starved for genuine attention, sat heavy with me for days. Chapter 5. What none of us expected, including me, was that the 6 women would grow close to each other during all of this instead of turning it into a competition. It started with Chloe and Hannah, who had exchanged numbers early on to coordinate their approaches for Alice's bet, back before either of them admitted their feelings had become real. Once the mission started falling apart individually, the 2 of them began talking honestly, comparing notes, realizing they were feeling the exact same confusing pull toward the same man. Instead of resenting each other for it, they grew closer. Within weeks, all 6 of them had formed a private group chat, separate entirely from whatever Alice had originally set up. A space where they were honest with each other about their feelings, processed their guilt over Alice's manipulation, and made a quiet agreement among themselves. Whatever happened with me, their friendship with each other would come first. Natalie put it plainly in a message the others later showed me. I keep thinking about how messed up it is that Alice used us like tools in whatever she's actually running from. I don't want to become someone who treats other women the way she's treated us. Whatever happens with Arthur, we handle it like adults, not like pieces on Alice's board. That message changed how I saw all 6 of them. This wasn't a group of women scrambling for a payout or fighting over a man. This was 6 women who had been dropped into an unfair, manipulative situation by someone they trusted completely, and who had chosen, despite the money on the table, despite the obvious tension, to protect their friendship and their integrity instead of letting Alice's scheme turn them into rivals. I respected that more than I could easily put into words. About 6 weeks after Grace's confession, I sat all 6 of them down together at a private dinner, my idea, needing to finally say things honestly and directly instead of letting the situation drift. I care about all of you, I told them once the initial awkwardness passed. In different ways for different reasons, Sophia, you make me feel calm in a way I didn't know I needed. Grace, your mind challenges me. Olivia, you make me laugh without trying. Natalie, your honesty is almost unsettling in the best way. Hannah, you see the world in colors I never noticed before. Chloe, you refuse to let me take any of this too seriously, and I need that. 6 pairs of eyes watched me carefully. I'm not going to choose one of you tonight like this is some kind of contest, I continued. That wouldn't be fair to any of you, and honestly I don't fully know yet what all of this means for me. But I want to get to know each of you without an agenda hanging over it. And whatever happens, I don't want it to cost you the friendship you've built with each other. That matters. Maybe more than whatever happens with me. Chloe, ever the direct one, broke the silence first. So what happens now? We stop performing, I said. For Alice, for the money, for whatever this was supposed to be. We just be honest. A short silence followed, and then Olivia smiled. You know, this is the calmest possible reaction to finding out you were the subject of $1 million bet, right? What were you expecting? Chaos, Sophia said, laughing. Screaming, some dramatic scene. Instead we got maturity. Almost rude of you. The table laughed together, and for the first time since the entire situation began, it felt less like the aftermath of betrayal and more like the beginning of something none of us had planned for, but none of us wanted to walk away from either. None of us knew, sitting at that table, that within days, Alice's own plan with George was about to collapse, and that she would show up on my doorstep with nowhere else to go. Chapter 6. Before I tell you about the night Alice came back, I need to tell you about the day she left, because that day involved George directly, and it's the moment I finally understood exactly what kind of man I'd been sharing an office with for 3 years. It happened about 5 weeks after Grace first told me about the bet, on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I walked into the office at 8:30, coffee in hand, expecting George at his desk the way he'd been every single morning since I'd hired him. His desk was empty. No jacket on the back of his chair, no laptop, no half-finished cup of coffee going cold beside his monitor, nothing. At 9, my office manager, Diane, knocked on my door looking uncomfortable. Arthur, George called in this morning. He quit, effective immediately. He didn't really explain why. I remember standing there, phone in hand, dialing George's number out of simple professional confusion, not yet suspicion. He didn't answer. I texted him asking if everything was okay, whether there was a family emergency I should know about. Nothing. By that afternoon, I'd learned the truth in the worst possible way, not from George and not from Alice, but from Grace, who called me sounding shaken. Arthur, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Alice and George left together this morning. A car picked them both up from your house. Chloe saw it. She was driving past on her way to work and recognized Alice's suitcases on the porch. I sat in my office for a long time after that call, staring at George's empty desk through the glass wall separating our offices, trying to piece together 3 years of memory into a shape that made sense. Every late night George had stayed to help me finish a presentation. Every business trip where he'd volunteered to handle logistics for Alice since she was alone at the house. Every dinner party where he'd lingered a little longer than the other guests. It had all been right in front of me, and I had trusted both of them too completely to ever look closely. I called Alice that night. She answered, which surprised me. I'm sorry you found out like this, she said, her voice steady in a way that told me she'd rehearsed the conversation. I should have told you myself. You could have just asked for a divorce, Alice, any time in the last 3 years. Why the bet? Why the 6 women? Why did you need George's coworker relationship with me to blow up in the middle of an office? Because I panicked, she said. I found out you were getting suspicious of the group chat between the girls. Grace told me you knew, and George convinced me it was time to just go, before everything fell apart and I lost my chance to leave with anything at all. So you left with him instead of your settlement. I left with him because I loved him, Arthur. The settlement was supposed to come later, once the divorce was finalized on my terms. It just happened faster than I planned. I hung up without saying anything else. There was nothing left to say to a woman who had used her own husband's assistant as a hiding place for 3 years, and then handed her closest friends a paycheck to help finish the job. For months after that, I didn't hear anything more about either of them, no calls, no updates, nothing beyond the occasional second-hand mention from someone in Alice's old circle. I assumed wrongly that the story was over. It wasn't. Chapter 7. She arrived at the house in Lincoln Park on a Thursday evening, 7 months after Sophia's first text message in Denver, looking nothing like the confident woman who had once run our home like it was hers by birthright. Her clothes were simple, unremarkable. Her hair, usually styled with careful precision, was pulled back hastily. She looked smaller somehow, like whatever had been holding her upright before had quietly given out. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing on the porch of the house she'd technically already lost the right to, given that our divorce had finalized 3 months earlier. Not on the terms she'd hoped for, since none of the 6 women had ever crossed the line she'd been banking on, and no infidelity clause had ever been triggered. I let her in more out of curiosity than any lingering attachment. She sat on the same couch we'd picked out together years earlier, hands twisting in her lap. George and I split up, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. It didn't work out the way I thought it would. What happened? She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands before the story came out in pieces. The first few months were good, she said. We got an apartment in Denver, far enough from Chicago that it felt like a fresh start. He was attentive, romantic, everything he'd been during all those years of stolen moments at your dinner parties. But it was different once it wasn't stolen anymore, Arthur. Once there was nothing left to sneak around. He started coming home late from his new job. He stopped noticing when I dressed up for him. And when I brought up marriage, actual commitment, something permanent, he'd change the subject every time. Did you ever ask him directly? Once, about 4 months in, her voice cracked slightly. He told me the truth, finally. He said he'd never actually pictured a future with me, that the excitement had always been about what we were taking from you, not about what we were building for ourselves. Once there was no one to hide from anymore, there wasn't much left holding us together. I said nothing, letting her continue. Then the money ran out faster than either of us expected. He'd left his job with you without another one lined up, assuming, I think, that my settlement money would carry us both for a while. When the divorce didn't go the way we planned, when none of the girls actually crossed the line with you, there was no settlement. Just 2 people in a Denver apartment with dwindling savings and nothing but resentment left between us. He moved out 3 weeks ago, didn't even leave a note. Just took his things while I was at work. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. Turns out he never wanted a future, he wanted a secret. And once your money and this house weren't part of the picture anymore, I didn't have anything left to offer him either. That's the part that's hardest to admit, Arthur. We were both only ever chasing the thrill of it. I sat across from her, feeling something strange and complicated, not satisfaction, not quite sympathy either, but something closer to clarity. Alice, why did you do it? The bet, the whole scheme, you could have just asked for a divorce. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. Because I knew what I'd walk away with if I just asked, Arthur. Almost nothing compared to what I'd built here over 4 years. I panicked. I'd already fallen for George, and I couldn't figure out a way out that didn't cost me everything, so I found the ugliest possible shortcut instead. Her voice cracked. I'm not proud of it. I used my closest friends like they were expendable. I used you like you were an obstacle instead of a person. I know that now. You put a price on my faithfulness, Alice, $1 million. Handed to 6 women who loved you enough to say yes before they understood what they were actually agreeing to. I know. Tears slid down her face, now unguarded. I've lost everyone, Arthur. George is gone. The girls won't answer my calls anymore. I don't even know what I was trying to protect in the end because I ended up losing all of it anyway. Why are you here? She looked at me directly for the first time since walking in. Because despite everything, some part of me still believes you're the best thing I ever had, and I threw it away chasing something that turned out to be an illusion. I'm asking for a second chance, Arthur. I know I don't deserve it. I'm asking anyway. I sat with that request for a long moment, feeling the old instinct in me, the one trained over 4 years to fix things, to give generously, to believe the best in the people I loved, stir faintly beneath the surface. But it didn't rise the way it used to. Chapter 8. I told Alice I needed time, and she left that evening with something fragile and hopeful still flickering in her expression. Over the following days, I found myself wrestling honestly with the question, not because I wanted her back in any romantic sense. That had ended somewhere in the last 7 months without my fully noticing. But because guilt has a persistent voice, and mine kept whispering that maybe, after everything I'd built with her over 4 years, I owed her one honest attempt. It was Natalie who helped me see the situation clearly. We were having coffee, an unhurried, no-agenda kind of coffee, the sort we'd been having regularly for weeks by then, when I mentioned Alice's visit. Are you thinking about giving her another chance? Natalie asked, no judgment in her voice, just quiet curiosity. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me feels like I should at least hear her out properly. She's lost everything. She seemed genuinely broken. Natalie nodded slowly, turning her cup in her hands. Can I tell you something, Arthur? I need you to actually hear it. Go ahead. A year before any of this happened, I was engaged to someone who told me, almost word for word, what it sounds like Alice has been telling herself about you, that I was too easy, too available, not enough of a challenge to keep him interested. I spent months after that believing something was fundamentally wrong with me for being kind, for showing up honestly instead of playing games. She met my eyes, steady and certain. Then I got pulled into this ridiculous, unfair situation with you, not because I chose to, but because Alice orchestrated it. And somewhere in actually getting to know you, I realized the problem was never me being too easy. The problem was people who couldn't recognize something real when it was standing right in front of them, because they'd convinced themselves love only counts if you have to fight for it. I sat there absorbing that, something loosening slowly in my chest. Alice didn't leave because you loved her too well, Arthur, Natalie said gently. She left because on some level she knew she wasn't giving that kind of honesty back, and instead of becoming someone who could, she convinced herself the real problem was you being too generous. That's not your failure, that's hers. I thought about Sophia's calm, Grace's sharp mind, Olivia's easy laughter, Hannah's eye for beauty, Chloe's fearless honesty, and now Natalie's quiet clarity, 6 women who, across 7 strange, complicated months, had shown me exactly what genuine, uncomplicated connection felt like. Not scarcity disguised as mystery, not manipulation disguised as devotion, just honesty. Alice hadn't lost me because I gave too much. She'd lost me because she was never brave enough to meet that honesty with her own. I called her 3 days later and asked her to meet me at a small park along the lakefront neutral ground, no memories of our marriage attached to it. She arrived hopeful, dressed carefully, clearly bracing herself for good news. I've thought about it, I told her once we'd settled onto a bench overlooking the water. Carefully. And, her eyes searched my face. And I can't go back, Alice, I'm not angry anymore, not really. But your friends, the ones you tried to buy with $1 million, ended up teaching me something you never did in 4 years of marriage. They showed me what it feels like to be wanted honestly, by people who aren't performing distance as a strategy to seem more valuable. Her face crumpled. So it's about them now. It was never really about them replacing you, I said carefully. It's about finally understanding what I actually deserve, and Alice, I don't think that's you. Not because you're irredeemable, but because you and I wanted fundamentally different things out of love. You wanted mystery, a chase, something to prove. I wanted honesty, consistency, someone who wouldn't need a scheme to feel secure in what we had. She cried quietly, staring out at the water. I really am sorry, Arthur, for the bet, for George, for all of it. I used 6 women who trusted me completely, and I hurt you in ways I'm only just beginning to understand. I know, I said, and I meant it. I forgive you, Alice, I do, but forgiving you doesn't mean rebuilding something that was never as solid as I believed it was. Before she left the park, she turned back once more. For what it's worth, they're lucky to actually know you. I had 4 years, and I never once appreciated what I had until it was already gone. I watched her walk away, and for the first time since Sophia's first text in Denver, I felt something close to peace settle over me. Chapter 9 stories like this often end with a single dramatic choice. The man picks one woman from the group, they fall into each other's arms, and everything wraps up neatly. Real life rarely moves that cleanly, and I want to be honest about how things actually unfolded. In the weeks after that dinner where I'd asked all 6 of them not to treat this like a contest, something became clear to me that I hadn't expected. Sophia was different. It wasn't that the others weren't wonderful, they were, each in her own distinct way, but with Sophia there was a steadiness underneath the warmth, something that didn't waver or perform, something that felt less like a spark and more like a foundation. Our conversations kept returning to each other without either of us engineering it. She was the one I called first when something good happened at work. She was the one whose opinion I found myself weighing most carefully. I told her that directly, about 2 months after the dinner, sitting on the same bench by the lake where I'd later end things with Alice. I don't want to keep pretending I don't know what I feel, I said. It's you, Sophia. It's been you for a while now, if I'm honest. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face. I need you to be sure, Arthur, not just comfortable. Sure, I'm sure. We started dating properly after that, slowly and without any need to rush it, and I brought her into the company not long after as my personal assistant. A role she filled with the same calm competence she'd shown me from that very first dinner in Denver. One that let us build something real in plain sight instead of hidden behind the kind of secrecy that had quietly destroyed my marriage to Alice. I was honest with the other 5 before Sophia, and I made anything official because I owed them that much. Grace took it with her usual sharpness. Honestly, Arthur, I saw it coming before you did. Olivia hugged me and told me she was genuinely happy, no performance in it. Hannah smiled and said Sophia had always had a kind of quiet gravity the rest of them couldn't compete with, and she meant it as a compliment, not a complaint. Natalie, characteristically direct, simply said, "Good, she's the right one. I'll tell you if I ever think otherwise." Chloe pretended to be devastated for exactly 30 seconds before bursting into laughter and demanding to be a bridesmaid whenever the day came. None of them tried to compete for something that had already settled into place, and I didn't lose any of them in the process. That mattered to me more than I expected. Grace became one of my closest confidants, someone whose sharp perspective I still sought before major business decisions. Olivia and I stayed close through an easy, uncomplicated friendship built on laughter. Hannah introduced me to an entire world of art I'd never taken the time to appreciate, and I became a regular fixture at her gallery shows, usually with Sophia beside me. Natalie remained someone whose clarity I trusted completely, the person who had helped me see the truth most clearly when I needed it most. And Chloe stayed exactly who she'd always been: blunt, funny, impossible to be upset with, and became one of Sophia's closest friends in her own right, the two of them forming a bond that had nothing left to do with me at all. The six of them stayed close to each other too, their friendship having survived the strangest possible test imaginable. Being offered $1 million to compete for the same man's affection, and choosing loyalty to one another, and eventually honesty about who truly belonged with whom, over the payout instead. As for Alice, I heard through mutual acquaintances months later that she'd moved back to Phoenix to be near her mother, working an ordinary job, rebuilding a version of her life far removed from the one she'd once had. I hoped honestly that she found some peace in it. Some people need to lose everything before they understand what it was worth, and I no longer carried bitterness toward her. Just a quiet, unexpected gratitude that her scheme, however unfair to six women who deserved better, had ultimately shown me my own worth more clearly than 4 years of marriage ever had. Looking back now, nearly 2 years after that first text about dinner in a Denver hotel room, I still laugh at how the story sounds when I tell new friends. My wife put $1 million bounty on my faithfulness, hired 6 of her closest friends to collect it, and I ended up marrying one of them while staying close with the other 5. Yes, married. Sophia and I married last fall, in a small ceremony by the lake. With Sophia in white and the other 5 women once hired to test my loyalty standing beside her as bridesmaids, laughing, genuinely happy, having become something far more valuable to each other than Alice's scheme ever intended. Real friends bonded by an absurd shared history, who chose honesty over a payout when it mattered most, and who never once tried to claim a place that had already found its way to the right person. Alice wasn't there. I don't think she expected to be, and it wouldn't have felt right if she had been. But I think about her sometimes, not with anger but with a strange kind of gratitude. She tried to use 6 brilliant, beautiful women as tools to buy her own freedom. Instead, those 6 women showed me exactly what I deserved, and taught me that the most beautiful thing about real love was never about a price tag, a wager, or proving your worth through manipulation. It's simply being chosen honestly by people who show up not because they were paid to, but because somewhere along the way, the performance stopped being enough, and the truth took over instead. She sent 6 women to test my faithfulness for $1 million. Instead, they showed me I was worth far more than that all along. The end.